It was supposed to be routine, a closed-door hearing. No cameras, just a handful of senators, a few aides, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, presiding under the pretense of judicial oversight review. But nothing about that room felt routine to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The chairs were too close, the lights too dim, and the questions? They weren't about legal interpretation, they were about control. Jasmine sat at the witness table, posture straight, hands resting calmly, but her eyes were sharp. She had been invited under the pretense of contributing to a discussion on judicial ethics. What she didn't know until that morning was that the real plan had already been written, and she was its target. Amy Coney Barrett sat elevated at the center of the chamber, not as a neutral moderator, but as judge, jury, and quiet executioner. The gavel rested in her hand, not like a tool of order, but like a loaded gun. "Congresswoman," Amy began, her voice cold and polished, "your recent remarks regarding Supreme Court rulings have been inflammatory. This hearing is not a stage for political rebellion." Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward. "With respect, Justice Barrett, when rulings start to resemble political oppression, the response might start to sound like rebellion, but it's actually called accountability." A murmur stirred behind the bench, but Amy raised her gavel and slammed it. Bang. "You are here as a guest, not an accuser. I suggest you moderate your tone, or this committee will have grounds to remove you." Jasmine smiled, just slightly. "Is that how justice works now? Speak too boldly, and you're silenced? Then maybe I came to the right place after all." The tension crackled. Amy's fingers tapped the bench. "One more outburst, and I'll find you in contempt of court." Another pause. Then Jasmine spoke, low, steady, and devastating. "You confuse contempt for court with contempt in court, and I came here with the receipts to prove the difference." Amy's knuckles went white around the gavel. "This hearing is over," she snapped, but Jasmine leaned forward one more time and said it slowly, not for the judge, but for the record. "No, Justice Barrett, this hearing has finally begun." Jasmine didn't move as the gavel echoed through the chamber. She didn't rise, didn't fold her notes, didn't excuse herself. Instead, she opened a small folder on the table in front of her, slowly, deliberately, and slid out a single sheet of paper. It was aged, photocopied, stamped, but its contents still radioactive. "Since you're calling this hearing closed," Jasmine said, looking up at Amy Coney Barrett, "I figured we could finally open something that's been sealed for far too long." Amy didn't respond, but her eyes narrowed. Jasmine held the page up with two fingers. Jane Doe v. State of Louisiana, 2004. A 14-year-old girl, assaulted by her stepfather, denied emergency reproductive care, because the judge, you, then just a federal nominee, said she wasn't mature enough to make such decisions alone. The air in the room shifted. Even the aides stopped pretending not to listen. Amy straightened slightly. "That case was sealed. It's not appropriate." "No, what's not appropriate," Jasmine cut in, "is using judicial decorum to bury injustice." She placed the page flat on the table. "You denied her relief, not because the law demanded it, but because your personal beliefs overruled her trauma." Amy's lips tightened. "Congresswoman, you are walking a very thin—" "No," Jasmine said, rising now. "I'm walking the exact line you drew, and I'm inviting this entire country to look at how it's been used, not to protect justice, but to punish girls, women, and anyone you find inconvenient." Barrett reached for her gavel. Bang. "That's enough." But Jasmine stepped forward. "You want to talk about enough?" Enough was the night that girl slept in a state hospital bed wondering what she did wrong. Enough is every decision since that sounds just like that one, wrapped in legal language, soaked in bias. A long pause. Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper. It was dead quiet now. "You used the gavel like a weapon, Your Honor, but I came here with something stronger, my voice, and I will not lower it for anyone who turned their robe into armor and called it justice." For a brief moment, Amy Coney Barrett said nothing. And that silence? That wasn't control. That was the sound of power cracking. The room had gone silent, but it wasn't peace. It was pressure. It was the weight of something long buried now clawing its way back to the surface. Justice Barrett didn't speak, but her posture changed. She leaned back, her fingers wrapped tighter around the gavel, the way one might grip a lifeline. Jasmine reached into her folder again. This time, it wasn't a ruling. It was a letter. "This isn't mine," she said, her voice calm. "It's hers." She held it up. It was handwritten, folded carefully. Old. Written 10 years after your ruling in Jane Doe versus State of Louisiana. She was never supposed to speak again, but she did. Amy's jaw clenched. Jasmine began to read. To the woman who sat higher than anyone in the room that day. You told me I wasn't old enough to decide, but you were old enough to dismiss me. You spoke of maturity, but I watched you ignore a child's plea like it was paperwork. And because of your choice, I carried pain I didn't ask for, and silence I didn't deserve. A pause. The courtroom was frozen. But I found my voice, and now someone else is using it, louder than I ever could. Jasmine looked up, her eyes locked with Barrett's. She wanted you to know. She's watching this. A visible ripple passed through the room. Amy shifted, just slightly, but it was enough. Jasmine saw it. Everyone did. The law may forget, the media may move on, but the ones you silence remember everything. And when they finally speak again, it's with witnesses. A low hum passed through the audience, reporters scribbling furiously, aides exchanging shocked glances. The name Jane Doe was now more than a file. It was a person, a voice, a reckoning. And Jasmine? She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just refused to be the last voice in the room. Amy Coney Barrett tried to reset the tone. She straightened her robe, adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat. This hearing is not a platform for political theater, she said tightly. I've ruled based on the Constitution, not personal beliefs. Jasmine didn't blink. She waited. Let the silence settle. And then she shattered it. You ruled, Your Honor, but you never ruled alone. You ruled with funding, with ideology, with a pulpit behind the bench. A rustle moved through the gallery. Barrett's expression didn't change, but her hands gripped the sides of the podium just a little too tightly. Jasmine reached into her binder and pulled out a page of financial disclosures. According to 2018 records prior to your nomination, you received speaking honorariums from the People of Providence Legal Coalition, a group that actively campaigns against reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ protections, and even interracial marriage precedent. Amy opened her mouth, but Jasmine didn't let her speak. You said you ruled from the Constitution, but your rulings align word for word with the groups that paid to hear you speak. Gasps, this time audible. And let's talk about People of Providence, because they don't just educate, they lobby. They write model legislation, and in 2021, one of their board members was photographed inside your chambers. Amy snapped, You're crossing into dangerous territory. Jasmine stepped forward. Number, I'm walking into the truth, and I came prepared. She slapped another document on the table, a leaked memo. This is a draft position paper prepared by that same group, outlining a strategy to dismantle federal protections for women and minorities using the courts as their primary vehicle. She held it up and read the header aloud. Memo, route to ruling, Barrett is our keystone. Silence. Jasmine's voice dropped, calm and final. So forgive me if I don't buy your neutrality, because your gavel doesn't sound like justice, it sounds like strategy. Amy sat still. The authority in her chair shrank, not because the robe changed, but because the myth around it did. And Jasmine? She didn't have to raise her voice, because the facts, like always, were loud enough. Amy Coney Barrett's voice, for the first time, cracked. This is no longer productive, she snapped. Congresswoman Crockett is out of order and in direct violation of procedural respect. I'm issuing a formal warning. One more violation, and I'll motion for removal. The room went dead quiet. Staffers froze mid-keystroke. Reporters held their breath. Even the security officers at the door looked unsure. But Jasmine? She smiled, and then she stood up. Out of order? She said, her voice calm. No, Justice. I'm very much in order, because the Constitution put me here. Amy tried to respond, but Jasmine raised one finger, not rudely but deliberately, and continued. Article 1, Section 6. Members of Congress shall not be questioned elsewhere for any speech or debate in either house. I came here as an elected representative, not as your clerk. And you don't get to remove me for doing exactly what my oath demands, telling the truth to power. Boom. A senator in the back shifted. A few aides glanced at each other. One reporter mouthed, "She just flipped the hearing on its head." Jasmine stepped forward. This isn't about order. This is about obedience, and I wasn't elected to obey you. Amy raised the gavel, her last defense. Her fingers trembled now. Jasmine pointed gently at it. Every time you slam that gavel to silence someone, you remind us what justice has become, a courtroom where the loudest thing isn't truth, it's fear in a black robe. The gavel never fell. Amy didn't move. Jasmine leaned in just enough for her voice to land exactly where it needed to. If you truly believed in the Constitution, you'd thank me for speaking, not threaten me for doing what you couldn't. And with that, she sat back down. No chance, no applause. Just one undeniable truth. In that moment, the robe had power, but Jasmine had legitimacy. By the time Jasmine Crockett walked out of that courtroom, the air outside had changed. She didn't know it yet, but across the country, millions had already heard her words. Clips from the hearing were everywhere. I wasn't elected to obey you. Every time you slam that gavel, you remind us what justice has become. I came here as an elected representative. You don't get to remove me for speaking truth. Within hours, her name was trending in all 50 states. On Twitter, X, Jasmine Crockett, the gavel backfired, voiceover robe. One law student posted, I've spent 3 years studying constitutional law. Jasmine Crockett taught me more in 3 minutes than any textbook. Another user wrote, Justice Barrett brought a gavel. Jasmine brought the people. Guess who won? On TikTok, teens were lip-syncing Jasmine's quotes. Professors were breaking down her citations. A Harvard law grad stitched the hearing video saying, This isn't a political moment. This is a generational correction. Meanwhile, in a high school gym in Atlanta, a student group replaced their debate banner with a quote, I wasn't elected to obey you, JC. Back on Capitol Hill, Barrett remained behind closed doors. Her team issued a short press statement. Justice Barrett maintains that courtroom decorum was breached and will be addressed through formal channels. But the world wasn't listening to formal channels anymore. They were listening to Jasmine. And Jasmine? She didn't post a victory thread. She didn't appear on late-night shows. She simply tweeted one sentence. I didn't speak for attention. I spoke because silence was no longer safe. That post hit 2.1 million likes in under 12 hours. The gavel could silence a room, but it couldn't silence a nation once it had started listening. 3 days had passed. No public comments from Justice Barrett, no follow-up hearings, just silence, the kind that doesn't bring control, but signals something's crumbling. But Jasmine Crockett? She didn't need to say anything, because others were speaking now, people who were never supposed to. A conservative law journal published an op-ed. While courtroom conduct must be respected, so must the constitutional right to speak truth to power. Congresswoman Crockett reminded us of that right, and the limits of judicial ego. A former federal judge went live on CNN. I've served on the bench for 30 years. I know the difference between order and control. What I saw in that room wasn't justice being protected. It was power being defended. At Liberty University, a Barrett stronghold, a group of students released an open letter. Justice Barrett lost more than composure. She lost credibility. And Jasmine Crockett reminded us that courage doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it just wears truth. Barrett's allies on the Hill began going quiet. An endorsement she expected for a judicial initiative vanished. A closed-door donor roundtable she was scheduled to attend canceled. Her name, once whispered with reverence, now came with hesitation, even within her own circle. Inside her chambers, aides began to question the strategy. "We underestimated her," one whispered. "Crockett didn't come for a fight. She came for a shift." Meanwhile, Jasmine received a handwritten letter from a retired Supreme Court justice. One sentence stood out. "You spoke with a voice I forgot existed in public life, unbought, unbowed, unshakable." Barrett still held the robe, still had the gavel, still sat on the highest bench in the land. But now, she sat alone, because when a system loses the silence that once protected it, all that's left is the echo of its own mistakes. The networks promoted it for days. Justice Amy Coney Barrett Speaks Live, a national address. Every major outlet tuned in. The Supreme Court, typically walled off from public opinion, now found one of its own standing in front of America's lens. It was staged, controlled lighting, measured pacing, a neutral backdrop. Everything designed to say dignity, poise, authority. Amy stepped to the podium, notes in hand. Her tone was low, formal, predictable. "Recent public discourse around my judicial conduct has raised important questions. While I maintain the integrity of my decisions, I acknowledge that perception and communication are part of a justice's burden." The words were polished, but the weight? Missing. Then, mid-sentence, the moderator interrupted. "Justice Barrett, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is here with us today. We've invited her for a response if you're willing to engage." Barrett stiffened slightly, but nodded. The camera cut, and there she was, Jasmine Crockett. No notes, no podium, just her. She stepped forward. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. "You speak of burdens, Justice Barrett, but what you carry is not a burden. It's a barrier. And the difference is, a burden you carry, a barrier you place on others." The silence that followed wasn't dead air. It was reckoning. Amy blinked. Once, twice, her lips parted, but no words came. Jasmine continued. "You say perception matters, but when a scared girl asks you for help, and you call her immature instead of endangered, that's not a perception problem. That's a power problem." Barrett looked down, just for a second, and that second told the truth, louder than any defense. Jasmine took one final step forward. The gavel can't fix what the robe refuses to face, so if you're not ready to hear the voices you once silenced, maybe it's time you stopped speaking for justice at all. The camera stayed on Barrett. Her throat moved, as if swallowing something sharp. Her eyes glistened, not from rage, not from pain, from recognition. She had nothing to say. And that silence? It wasn't strength. It was surrender. They called it a moment. But moments don't rewrite systems. What Jasmine Crockett had done was something else entirely. Within 48 hours of the live broadcast, university campuses erupted in walkouts, not in protest, but in recognition. Civil rights attorneys from 6 states drafted a formal letter to Congress titled, "We stand with the voice that wasn't gavelled." A national organizing summit was announced, gathering women, students, survivors, and lawmakers. At the center of it all, a phrase that began as a whisper, then became a movement, the Crockett Doctrine. Its core idea: truth is not a disruption, it's a requirement. Respect is earned, not enforced. Power without accountability is not law, it's legacy violence. In the days that followed, political strategists scrambled to understand what had just happened. How did one woman walk into a hearing, speak for 15 minutes, and undo 2 decades of judicial invincibility? But they were asking the wrong question. Jasmine hadn't undone anything. She had revealed it. Jasmine's next move wasn't a press tour. It was a public town hall. No stage, no velvet ropes. She stood in a circle of women, black, white, Latina, Muslim, indigenous, survivors, students, scholars, mothers. This wasn't just about me being disrespected, Jasmine told them. This was about all the people they hope stay quiet, long enough to stay forgotten. Someone in the crowd asked her, "What happens now?" And Jasmine's answer was simple. Now? We stop asking to be heard. We speak so loudly that ignoring us becomes a liability. Meanwhile, inside the Supreme Court building, Amy Coney Barrett met privately with Chief Justice Roberts. No official statements, no resignations, but something had changed. She no longer asked, "How do I protect the court?" She now wondered, "Who protects it from me?" The Crockett Doctrine wasn't law, not yet, but it had already become something more powerful in the hearts of a generation. A new way to speak, a new way to listen, a new line that even Gavels couldn't cross. The auditorium was packed, not with politicians or cameras, but with people. Young, old, angry, hopeful, not there to be saved, but to stand with someone who reminded them they could save themselves. The banner behind the stage read, "The Crockett Doctrine. A voice is a right, not a privilege." The lights dimmed, and Jasmine Crockett walked out. No notes, no suit of armor, just a woman who refused to shrink in the face of power. She stepped to the mic, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, her voice cut through the silence like it always did. Calm, clear, undeniable. "They told me to sit down. They told me to speak softer. And then, when I didn't, they reached for a gavel. Beat. But here's what they didn't understand. I was never afraid of their silence. I was afraid of ours. And that fear, that's gone now." The crowd listened, like it was church, not because of faith, but because of truth. They used robes to hide. They used laws to control. And they used tradition to excuse everything they didn't want to change. But I'm here to say, the robe doesn't protect you from being wrong, and the gavel doesn't make you right. This movement isn't about rage. It's about reckoning. It's about every voice that was once too tired, too dismissed, too scared to speak, finally saying, "I'm still here, and I remember everything." She paused, looked out into the crowd. Then she said the line that would be etched into walls, headlines, and hearts. "I never needed the bench to change the law. I only needed the courage to speak before they told me not to." The crowd didn't erupt. They rose, quietly, like a tide, a standing ovation not out of celebration, but alignment. And in a building not far from that auditorium, behind thick columns and tradition, a gavel sat untouched. Because now, for the first time in a very long time, it had nothing left to silence. They wanted the last word, so they reached for the gavel. But I didn't come here for silence. I came here for truth. And if speaking it makes them uncomfortable, then let them squirm under the weight of a justice they no longer understand. Pauses, steady breath. They told me I was out of line, but the only reason they noticed the line is because I crossed it with the people who were never invited in. They said I disrespected the court, but I showed respect to the Constitution, the one they quote when it's convenient and ignore when it's human. Let the record show. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't break anything. All I did was refuse to lower my voice so they could raise theirs unchecked. Leaned slightly into the mic. If that scares them, maybe it's time they stopped hiding behind robes and gavels and started standing in front of the people they claim to serve. Because I didn't come here to obey. I came here to remind them, power is not justice, and justice doesn't flinch.